Hello everybody and happy afternoon. This is Elisa McCall with Polar Bears International, and we are coming to you live from Tundra Buggy 1 on the shores of Hudson Bay, just outside of Churchill, Manitoba. And we are just so excited to be with you today. We are kicking off polar bear season, which is our very favorite time of the year. And as you can see on your screen there, we are sitting next to a napping polar bear. So we will be very shortly talking about this polar bear and all the polar bears in the area and about what we're doing here and why. And so we would just really love to also hear from you and answer any questions you have. We will be here for the next several weeks, so you will have lots of time to ask your questions, but we want to answer them anytime you have them. So please send them in, whether you are watching on explore.org or a Facebook page. Make sure you're getting them in the comment section, and we have a great team monitoring and passing the questions on to us. So again, I'm Elisa, and I'm joined by some wonderful people here on Tundra Buggy 1. And I will first introduce you to my colleague, BJ Kirchhofer, who maybe can talk a bit about his job and explain what the heck Buggy 1 even is.
Yeah, so my name is BJ, and I've been with PBI for over 10 years now. And each fall I've had the great opportunity to travel north and spend time on this vehicle. So this is Tundra Buggy 1. It's almost like a polar bear monster truck is probably the best way to describe it. We have something like 4 or 5 foot tires, and the floor of the vehicle is more than 6 feet off the ground, and the entire thing is, well, I don't know, about 25 or 30 feet long. So it keeps us high and above, out of the reach of polar bears, and we're able to meander around this rough terrain and sit and observe these animals as they're waiting for the sea ice to freeze. This Tundra Buggy is a little different. Most of the Tundra Buggies are a little bit bigger and carry tourists during the day. This one here does not have tourist seats in it. We just have a couple seats, and we carry scientists or specialists in education so that we can reach out to folks like yourself and talk about polar bears and what's happening outside the window. So, Elisa, what is happening outside the window?
Yeah, well, a lot and not so much at the same time. So we right now are in Churchill because it is the annual polar bear migration. So each fall we see polar bears congregate in this area, and we can come get up close to them, which is a pretty unique situation compared to the rest of the polar bear world. Now, why this is happening is a result of a few different factors. If you have a map in front of you, and we will later in the season be able to show you guys maps more directly, but if you can imagine Hudson Bay in your mind, so it's that big water body in the middle of Canada, or I guess just slightly right off center in Canada, the circulation of the water in Hudson Bay goes counterclockwise, and there's a lot of freshwater rivers along the west coast of Hudson Bay. So this cold water is coming down from the Arctic, it's moving along the west down to the south. Meanwhile, all this fresh water is coming into the bay, and so what we're seeing is that ice starts forming here when temperatures drop. Ice is going to start forming here earliest in the bay, and the polar bears, whether they know it directly or have a sense of it, they know that if they come here near Churchill, they're going to be some of the first bears to get on that sea ice when it's thick enough for them to walk on. And polar bears love sea ice because sea ice means food. So polar bears are a very specialized bear. For those of you that maybe are joining us from the Katmai brown bear cams, welcome. Thank you for coming over to these bears. Polar bears are much pickier than brown bears, and so their favorite food is the seal. In fact, they like ice obligate seals, which just means that they're seals that need sea ice. So polar bears head out on the sea ice, and they're looking for ringed and bearded seals, the two main species of seals out here. Polar bears really rely on the blubber that seals have to provide them enough calories to sustain themselves. So polar bears are the biggest bear of all. They've got massive caloric requirements. They just need to eat a lot of high-fat, high-calorie food to get by. They love their seals, and the sea ice provides them access to the seals. So polar bears are really ready for their next meal, but of course in Hudson Bay, though the sea ice, we hope, is going to freeze up here in the next few weeks and be around all winter. In the summer, it completely melts. So we see annual sea ice here. Completely melts, completely refreezes. Now in the summer, these bears are used to coming on shore, so they'll come and they'll fast, or they'll go months without food, which they have adapted to do well. So that if they've eaten enough seals, they get fat enough, and then they can come on shore for a few months and live off their own body fat. But that means that they're going to be a little lazier because, you know, if you don't know when your next meal is coming, you're going to maybe take her a little bit easy. Polar bears don't have a lot of food on this landscape, so they're going to mostly hang out. We see them doing a lot of napping. You've seen a few napping bears yesterday and today. This guy here looks like, as is common in this area, found a nice little bed of kelp to rest in, probably dug himself a little hole and curled up and has been here. Well, we've been on this bear for a couple hours now, and that's super normal. And it's pretty nice to watch. Occasionally the head will pop up, but these bears are pretty relaxed right now. They've got to be liking the snow and cold temperatures. It's pretty lovely place to be. So we're just so lucky that we get to roam around and watch these bears. So this morning, for those of you that joined us earlier today, you saw mom and two cubs, which was pretty special. It's always really nice when we get to see family groups. We love all the polar bears, but isn't it extra special to see some of the babies out here? It's just so lovely. So that was really good, and BJ motors us around, and this is BJ's, what were we saying, BJ? It's your 11th or 12th bear season out here, maybe?
I lost track at 10.
Yeah, you just stopped counting after 10.
Yep.
Yeah, so BJ's seen all sorts of stuff and has, got Buggy 1 just in tip-top shape here, and this is my 9th polar bear season out here, and I still get turned around on these trails completely. Luckily, BJ knows.
I do too. I just don't lead on to it.
Well, you're really good at faking it then. If you always know where you are, that's hilarious. Yeah, so make sure you guys are sending in your questions that you have. We did get a couple questions this morning that I would love to talk about. We've got so much to talk about with polar bears. We had a great chat with Ranger Mike last week comparing brown bears and polar bears. There's really cool stuff to compare between the two bears. And I think one of the biggest things that we should point out, the differences between brown bears and polar bears, at least on the cam here, is that you are going to see kind of a different situation. So we also love the brown bear cam. I mean, how amazing is it to watch those brown bears eat those salmon and get so fat? It's such a fun time of year, and you really get to know those individual bears. Bead nose. I mean, it's just so cool that you can kind of build this, what it feels like a relationship with individual bears. It is a little bit different here out on the tundra. Like we mentioned, kind of the polar bears are moving through this area. They're waiting for sea ice. Yes, they are napping, but they're not really hanging around as much. And it can be harder to tell polar bears apart from each other. Maybe if we all line them up and got to really know their faces, it'd be easier. But we can really only for sure tell polar bears apart out here when they have a very distinctive scar. And Explore.org viewers are amazing at finding that sort of stuff. So if you guys do see a polar bear that has a unique marking or scar and you're pretty sure you're seeing it in multiple places, we would love to hear from you. Super fun. Yeah, but otherwise it can be tough. So we don't get to necessarily know these bears as well as we get to know the brown bears, but we're still so fortunate we get to get up close and personal with them. And then of course these bears aren't eating as much, so it's so fun to watch the brown bears gorge themselves on the cams there. These bears, you will see them eating kelp this year for sure. Last year we saw one scoop up a meadow vole and have a little meadow vole snack on camera, but mostly what we see is them just waiting around to go eat their seals. So I did just see a question come in. I'm asking about the live sessions for brown bears. Yeah, so there are live sessions for the brown bear cams, and those are hosted by the rangers in the Katmai Park on the brown bear cam page on explore.org, and that season is just wrapping up. But we highly recommend checking it out next year when it's live again. It's super fun, and then it rolls right into the polar bear season. People are also asking how many polar bears are in this area, and that's a really good question. So to give you guys a little bit of context, and again, throughout the season, we'll post some maps and kind of help the visualization of this area because there's a lot going on. But there are 19 different polar bear populations around the Arctic in 5 different countries, in Russia, Norway, Greenland, US, and Canada. And Canada does have 2/3 of the world's polar bears and 13 of the 19 populations, which is pretty cool. Now, we right now are in the western Hudson Bay polar bear population. So we're with a specific group of polar bears, the best studied polar bears in the world, who have taught us a lot of what we know about polar bears, and we will talk a little bit about that later. But this population, it was around the 1,200 bears-ish in the 1980s, and now the estimate is closer to about 800 bears, give or take. A few. It's hard to, of course, nail down estimates. So we have seen declines, but that's kind of what we're here to talk about this year too, is because we love polar bears and just want to share amazing facts with you about them because they're just such a cool animal. And we'll also talk about kind of what's going on with them and how we can all make sure that we've got polar bears in the Arctic forever and for future generations to be able to see them in the wild, and for polar bears just to be able to roam the Arctic always as they want to do.
Lisa, I got a question.
Please. I have a question for you too.
Okay, well, my question is, so the brown bears, they can tell from scars and things. I see some what looks like maybe ear tags in this bear.
Yeah.
Do you think if we got close enough, we could see who this animal is?
If we got close enough. I mean, we have actually, a bear has gotten close enough to us that we've, was it you that took a picture? One of our guests took a picture of the ear tags at one time, and we could actually identify the
We could
bear.
read most of the number. I think there was some earwax maybe in some of the in some of the numbers there, so we couldn't quite make it all out.
Yeah. So any bears here that are part of the research program, they do get an individual ear tag with a unique number in it. But those ear tags are white, and the number is very lightly scratched into them. So we do have to get pretty close to be able to see that. And at that point, we're letting the bear approach us, maybe, get close to the buggy, and we can zoom in on a camera into the ear tag. So it is rare that we, in this scenario, would be able to tell who's who.
What if we could read it? What information could we get?
Yeah, so if you can read it, so if you ever come across, a bear and you find out its individual ID number, that means, again, that the bear has been handled at some point by scientists in the past. So that means there's some really cool information about the bear. So every time scientists in this area handle one of these bears and give them an ID number, they're also taking measurements like body length, body width, skull size. They're finding out the age of the bear. They're probably taking fur samples to analyze their fur for things like diet and stress hormones. There's all sorts of really important information that we can get from polar bears that we can only get by getting up close and personal. But there's also some really cool technology we can use to learn about polar bears in different ways. And maybe, BJ, you want to talk about your research project on the lodge?
Sure. So we are using a movement tracking radar to try to find polar bears as they come near the Tundra Buggy Lodge. So if you tune in to the Lodge North or Lodge South polar bear cameras, this radar is mounted onto the same structure. It's at one of the far ends, and this radar, the panels themselves, the 4 radar units, they're about the size of an iPad each. They're really hard to see with the naked eye because the building's so big and the panels are so small. But these little panels sit there and they emit a little bit of frequency and listen for what returns back and looks for movement out in space. If it senses something that moves, it puts it on a Google map and focuses another camera on the moving target. So most of the time that is going to be polar bears wandering around out there. It can differentiate between different sizes of objects. So obviously a Tundra Buggy is a lot different than a polar bear. So it can tell the difference between those sizes by the amount of energy that's returned to the panels. And we're testing this thing to maybe be a new tool for polar bear detection for maybe for communities in the north or remote camps or other places where there are people that we want to keep safe from polar bears.
Awesome. We just got another question in that I'm going to throw to you because you work closely with both of these organizations. So someone is wondering about the importance of collaborations with zoological institutions such as the Yorkshire Wildlife Park and the San Diego Zoo to provide both funding and to reach out to the public for education and awareness for polar bear conservation and their habitats. So yeah, at Polar Bears International, we do collaborate with some zoological institutions. Zoos in North America reach more people every year than all sporting events combined. So they are a huge avenue to reach the public, to raise awareness, to talk about conservation, and to help people build these personal relationships with these animals. We feel like if you better understand an animal, you'll better love it and want to protect it. And so zoos are a great partner in that way. But yeah, they absolutely are supporting really important research that's helping wild bears. And BJ, maybe you could speak a bit to that.
Sure. So the radar system that I just spoke about, that the funding there was provided by Utah Hogle Zoo in Salt Lake City. They want to get involved in polar bear conservation, and so we work together with Hogle Zoo in order to put this project together. For human safety with polar bears. We've also done a lot of work with the San Diego Zoo, and everything from testing polar bears' hearing. This is something that we wouldn't be able to do in the wild, but we can do with captive animals, so that we can understand exactly what polar bears hear. Also, we're currently doing a study where we're looking at polar bear maternal dens, so where the dens are, how long mom stays at the den, how big the cubs are, what they do at the den. All these sorts of things are very interesting to scientists, and so we're working with the San Diego Zoo to sort of unlock and define some of these things. So zoos have provided a lot of funding for some really neat projects here in the Arctic.
Fantastic. Oh, we've got lots of great questions coming in. So I'm going to hit a couple here quick. So someone... And this might have been a picture from a day or two ago, because this bear was hanging around. So there was a bear at the Tundra Buggy Lodge that had a black mark that kind of looked like oil. What would that have been from? I know what you're talking about. So he was actually nicknamed Spot, or Spotty Bear, at the lodge.
And he was pretty big.
He was a good size
That might
bear.
be one of the biggest bears we've seen so far this season.
Yeah, on the thinner side, but big frame. You can tell when he's eating well, he must be just a monster out there, just a beast of a bear. But yeah, so that black mark is an indication that this past fall, so just a month or two ago, he would have been captured by Environment Canada scientists as part of the research program that I mentioned. So the scientists do come out here every fall and every spring, and they do that mark recapture work where they handle the bears, take samples, measure them, and send the bears on their way. They are finding these bears by helicopter, and we want to make sure, of course, if we find a bear once, we don't need to find it again. And one way that you do that is after you're finished measuring a bear and you're ready to let it go, you make a black mark with it's kind of this short-term paint mark on the back between the shoulder blades. And Environment Canada uses a black color, and it will wash off in up to 8 weeks, especially once that bear gets on the sea ice and swims it all and scratches it. That paint will wash off, but it lasts long enough so that if the scientists see it again from a helicopter, they know they've already handled that bear. Now, Manitoba's Department of Sustainable Development in this area also handles bears as part of the Polar Bear Alert Program, which we'll talk about later this fall, and they will put a green mark on the back of the bear. So if you ever see a bear that has some green between its shoulder blades, that means it was handled by Polar Bear Alert. So yeah, we'll see if Spotty Bear comes back. He might be hanging around, but oh yeah, he was a good-sized bear. He liked the lodge too. He was our buddy one night over dinner. It's pretty fun. And then, so BJ, I'm going to throw this one to you too, because we actually have been talking about this over the last day. What other kinds of animals do we see in the areas that we travel around here?
Yeah, so some animals are more common than others. Ptarmigan are pretty common. They're hard to get on the cam. Occasionally we do. They don't stick around for too long usually. They're not real fast moving, and now this is a small bird. They call them tundra chickens out here sometimes. All white about this time of year, and brown and white in the summertime. We've got Elisa's trying to act out some of the animals here on the buggy. We also have fox, both red fox and white fox here, or Arctic fox, and we've seen a couple of them. I think the cam was able to catch some of them this year yet. We oftentimes see them running around the lodge at night too, around dinner time. We've got some really unique birds that we see. Snowy owl is a pretty neat one, and I think Explorer has a snowy owl cam. We have a gyr falcon, which is a really large bird that can come either in a dark morph, kind of a gray color, to a white morph, which is they're almost pure white. A really neat bird. I think it's one of the largest falcons. So it's exciting to see one of those. What else do we have, Lisa? I guess there's a couple seals we may have out in the bay if we sit here, which we are right on the edge of the water right now. The tide is out, so you can just barely make out where the beach would be. By this evening, the beach will come to us, and we may catch some seals. So could have harbor seal. We could have ring seal, polar bear's favorite food, or maybe a bearded seal. Someone spotted a bearded seal the other day, and that animal is huge.
So big.
Hard to miss.
Yeah.
What else? What am I missing, Lisa?
The wolverine, maybe.
Oh, yeah, wolverine. So wolverines aren't spotted very often here, but when they are, it's pretty exciting. We had one run right underneath Buggy 1 several years ago. I think it might have been Elisa's first year up here. And we actually got it on the cam, so that was way cool.
Yeah.
We could also have wolves. I don't think we've ever caught one on the cam, but we could have wolves here. We could have caribou. We've seen moose super close to the
weird moose.
Weird moose. Moose that took a wrong turn, I guess.
Yeah.
Wanted to check the ocean out.
Directionally challenged moose.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good reminder too for those of you that are maybe new to these cams. This isn't the only cam. Maybe you could talk about where all the cams are.
Sure. So, most of the ones you're probably focusing on right now would be Buggy 1 cam, the Tundra Buggy cam, or Lodge North, Lodge South. But also there's 2 cameras that are about 30 miles from where we're sitting right now out in Wapuss National Park. And that would be Cape, I think it's Cape East and Cape West now. And especially in the summertime, you can see caribou and moose and all kinds of other things. Polar bears are mainly what you might catch there, or the occasional Arctic hare. For some reason, the Arctic hare likes to sit on those barren eskers where the wind blows strongest. I'm not sure if they're lost as well.
I don't know.
But they look pretty cute out there.
They are super cute.
But yeah, check out the Cape cameras as well. Some really neat wildlife out that way.
Yeah.
And then there's also the Northern Lights cam. So after dark, which dark comes early this time of year to this part of the world, about 6 o'clock, 6:30 Central, it's starting to get dark, and that's only going to get earlier and earlier as we spend time here on Hudson Bay. And you may catch a glimpse of the Northern Lights. I guess they were out last night.
Yeah, apparently. I must have been asleep.
Yeah, I didn't see them. But we saw some pictures, and it looked good.
Looked pretty good. Cool. Well, more and more questions rolling in. BJ, I have to ask you, I may be not directionally challenged like the moose out here, but I'm a little spatially challenged. How far away would you say that bear is from us right now?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to tell looking at the camera how far away things are, and especially these cameras have such a good zoom. If you caught the mother and 2 cubs earlier, the mom and 2 cubs, they were a long ways out. I mean, they weren't impossible to see with the naked eye, but with binoculars, we were able to make them out. This bear here, I don't know. I bet we're 40 yards from that bear.
What's that in Canadian
About
terms?
the same,
Meters?
40 meters.
Okay.
Yeah.
That works.
Right about the same.
Cool.
Oh, no, we could pace it off, but we may not make it back to say.
Yeah, need a volunteer for that.
Exactly.
And can people visit the polar bears? Absolutely. If you check out, just Google Churchill Tourism. We work with Frontiers North Adventures, and we stay out here at their Tundra Buggy Lodge. You don't need to stay at the lodge. You can do day trips on Tundra Buggies in Churchill. There's no shortage of ways to get up here. Of course, the fall is the main polar bear time. Northern light season really kicks off February, March. And then we've got wonderful flowers, birds, and belugas all summer with a spattering of polar bears. So we definitely encourage anyone interested to come up and check it out for themselves.
I thought you were going to say a spattering of mosquitoes.
Oh, well, maybe more than a spattering. It's like air herds of mosquitoes. I don't know what you call it. Swarms. Swarms.
No, it's not that bad.
Most of the time. Yeah. The bugs, bring bug spray. Let's just say bring bug spray. But you will have a great time, guaranteed.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
Did this bear dig a hole, or is that just a sinkhole? Yeah, good question. So we do see these bears dig day beds. So this was an existing, what we think, it looks like kelp, eh? You think it's a line of kelp?
I think it's kelp, yeah.
Yeah, so often we do get these big kind of heaps of kelp or seaweed out here. Very soft. I don't know, maybe it smells good. Bears seem to like them as day beds. So bear will tend to find a nice pile of kelp and dig just a little divot in there and settle its big old bear body down for a nice nap. So we do see that fairly commonly. And then if they get a little snacky, then they can eat some of the kelp, which we often see them basically eating their own bed too, which is pretty funny.
And there's not really much to do this time of year. That's why these bears are just hanging out. There's no ice. No way to catch seals, unless maybe they happen to find one that was stranded when the tide went out. But really, they're just kind of relaxing, waiting for the sea ice to freeze so they can head back out on the bay.
Yeah, and so we got a question, is there any case that a mama polar bear being pregnant during the winter? Yeah, so hopefully there are many pregnant females right now, but we will not see them here. So any pregnant females will be farther inland right now in their dens, waiting to give birth over the winter. So any females we see out here will be either single or with cubs. And then someone is also asking, does PBI follow or study the bears all year round? Yes, absolutely. So there are, we work with different government and universities around the world that do study polar bears year round, and yeah, so do we. So this is a great time of year where we get to be in Churchill, Manitoba, but we are working year round in multiple different countries, and BJ maybe can talk a bit about that. He's go, go, go all winter.
Yeah, so the denning work that I spoke about earlier with San Diego Zoo, and I should mention Uvehong Zoo in Rhenen, Netherlands, and help me out, Elisa, here. Oh my gosh. The other zoo that's helping us.
Well, we have so many zoo partners now.
That's we got so many, and I'm so sorry. But anyway, so that work is done in the springtime, in late February and early March, and that's timed by the polar bears themselves. So when we want to get there just before they emerge from the den, and so we can catch that entire period where they would spend at the den site itself. So that's in the springtime there. Also, if one of our employees are going to go out on spring capture work, that's happening just after that. Lisa, when does the work usually get done here on Hudson Bay?
Usually, recently in the last couple of years, there's been there's one project every February, March with moms and cubs, and then there's a sea ice ecology project that happens in late April, early May. They're trying to time it before the ice starts breaking up, so they can get a good picture of what's happening with the bears in this region before they're coming back to shore. So that's kind of like late spring type thing up here, which is, it's pretty fun. It's a neat time of year to head out and see the sea ice and seals and some dead seals and some fat polar bears, hopefully, and it's good.
Yeah, and more polar bear work will happen around the Arctic in the fall as well.
Yep. Yeah, there'll be, again, the mark recapture programs out here in this part of the world. And then polar bear research is really intense, and it's really expensive, and it can be really dangerous. So it tends to have these kind of short windows of time where you go out for maybe a couple weeks. You get as much information as you can, and then you spend a lot of the rest of the year potentially on your computer. You're analyzing samples, you're making sure that there's a good reason that you handled those bears. You're going to use the information you got from them and use it for good and get the most that you can out of it. So you're going to run all the samples, you're going to do the analyses, you're going to look at the results and figure out what they're saying and what the story is telling you about the environment. And then you're making decisions based on what you're learning from polar bears. So it's really kind of all year round. One thing that you guys can do if you're interested in following the bears year round, part of the program in this region is tracking polar bears. So collars and GPS ear tags are put out on some of these polar bears so that we can follow them while they're out on the sea ice. So the bears are here right now, but as soon as the ice comes back, they don't really want much to do with us. They need to go hunt seals, which are farther out on the bay, and we just can't really get a good look at what's going on. but we are really interested in what's going on. So that's part of where the tracking technology comes into play. It helps us understand what polar bears are doing and when and where, and just it can really inform our conservation efforts. And Polar Bears International works with University of Alberta and Environment Climate Change in Canada, I should say, to post some of those collared bears on our bear tracker on our website. So year round, you can check out where some bears are at any given moment, and kind of see how they're using the bay. And it's just so neat because there's all these different individual strategies. Every bear is kind of doing something different. Some travel huge distances and some stay closer to home. Some have young cubs, some have older cubs, and it's just a really, really neat way to kind of get at what the bears are doing when they're in the environment that they really want to be in, which is sea ice. And we did get a question from how far do polar bears come to congregate at Hudson Bay? So females tend to spend the summer a little farther inland, trying to get away from maybe the big males, whereas the big males might come on shore right around here and not have to move very much. It's not uncommon for bears to travel 50 to 100 kilometers inland for the summer and then walk back out to the coast in the winter. We do see that these bears have something that we call site fidelity, and so that means that they're coming back to the same sites year after year. A lot of them, they probably just learned that that was a good place to be, just like a lot of people like to be close to home, so they come back and hang out, whereas we do see some bears moving around to different populations, but that's still something we're learning more about, but it definitely gives us a good sense of where the bears are going to be every year. And it's a pretty cool thing. So we do see all sorts of different strategies in this population. Mums that have really little cubs do tend to move a little less far. They don't do as massive trips, which makes sense because their babies just have little legs and it's hard to walk around when you're a baby polar bear. So how often would a polar bear like this go hunting? When they are out on the sea ice, very roughly, they're going to be catching approximately 1 seal a week to keep themselves going. Male polar bears have a little more, they've got some more options when it comes to feeding, so they can hunt the bearded seals, the really big seals, easier than the females can. And then females with cubs, of course, want to be hunting a lot of smaller seals or even seal pups. Bears will just eat seals, period, so whatever they can get. But those kind of it averages out to about a seal a week. So polar bears just need a lot of calories that they're really only getting from fat. They're very fat adapted. They don't process carbs and proteins the same as their brown bear cousins do. They really rely on the blubber to keep them going. And if you look out on this tundra right now, sometimes it just blows my mind that these bears can live out here. I mean, it just looks like one of the harshest environments. It's cold, it's snowy, there's just not a lot of food around, but the polar bears, they can be on land for months on end and then go out on the ice, which, if anything, looks crazier than the tundra, and they make a go of it, and they love it out on the ice. BJ, can you talk about PBI in Churchill? Like, how often we're in Churchill? Do we live here? What do we do here? Spend a good amount of time here.
Yeah, so we actually have an expanding presence here in Churchill. Historically, our staff would be here in the fall, so anywhere from the end of September right through until the end of November, and that's mostly because of when the polar bears are here, and so our staff will show up a little bit early and start prepping all of our gear and I guess all of our logistics and everything, so that we can bring you Tundra connections, so we can bring the cams, all that kind of stuff here from Churchill. Several years ago, we started working with Explorer on the Beluga camera, the Beluga cam, which is super neat. And so that started our summer presence in Churchill. And yeah, so really we're pretty much around from about June until the end of November.
Yeah, we have a local intern or student that works and lives in Churchill. Journey, some of you have maybe met her via the Beluga Cam, and she's working with us throughout the fall this year as well, which is super fun. She's a blast, and yeah, we do sure love Churchill. All right, couple more questions, and then we do want to introduce you also to our special guests. that are on Buggy 1 with us right now. So part of what we do all fall is that we are roaming around looking for polar bears, but we're also giving a chance for other folks to see polar bears and kind of use their expertise to help us talk about polar bears and help us talk to the public and answer questions about things related to polar bears. So we do these live chats for Explore, which are so much fun. And we also do a kind of related program we call Tundra Connections, which are educational webcasts. And for that, we bring up these guest speakers. So we've got a couple of folks with us this week that have been up with us before. Maybe a couple of you would remember. We've got Jody Reimer sitting up front. Hey, Jody. And then we've got Flavia over here. So we might introduce both of them and just get them to tell you briefly about what they do and what they like about being in Churchill. And then if you guys had any questions for our guests today, you're more than welcome to also pepper them with questions. Go for it, Jody.
Hi, everybody. Like Elisa said, I'm Jody Reimer, and I'm part of that group she was just talking about at the University of Alberta. So we're the ones who get to deal with all of the information coming off of those callers about where the bears are going and how they're using the ice. So that's pretty fun to be part of the team that gets to deal with that stuff. It's my second year up here with Polar Bears International, and I'm really excited to be back. The first time was a lot of fun, and so it's a treat to get asked back. And normally, the other couple of times I've come up to Churchill, it's been more in the context of doing field work. So I have been fortunate to get to be part of the group that goes out and takes a lot of these samples. So takes the hair samples, measures, different sizes of the bears, looks at their sex, gets ages, and helps to build that really long-term set of data that we have about this very special population of polar bears. And I'm really excited to come back because often when we're handling those bears, as Elisa was mentioning, they need to be sedated so that they aren't a danger to us while we're trying to help them. And so it's a treat to actually be here and deal with bears that aren't sedated and get to watch them do their bear stuff. That's really fun for me. And the other thing that's really cool is getting to chat with the other guests that PBI brings in. So they bring in a really fun, diverse group of people, and we don't get to see each other very often, a couple times throughout the year at conferences or things like that. But it's nice to have time just cruising the tundra, chatting with other scientists, and talking about all the exciting stuff going on in the world of polar bears and climate.
Thanks, Jody. Introduce you to our next guest here.
Yeah, hi. I'm Flavio Lehner. I'm a scientist as well, and really glad to be up here with Polar Bears International, Jody, Elisa, and BJ. I'm currently living in Boulder, Colorado in the United States, actually. I'm working at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, so we're doing a lot of atmospheric research there, and studying the weather and the climate and how it's changing both on a daily time scale as well as over many years. And obviously the weather is always something that is important for everybody, but in particular for polar bears. As we've heard earlier, the polar bears are here at the coast of Hudson Bay and essentially waiting for the change of the seasons. So when the sea ice is forming, and they can go out to hunt. And scientists have spent many years studying how the weather and the climate is changing. And we've observed how over the last several decades, so tens of years, changes in the environment are happening up here that we're trying to both understand as well as predict, because we want to understand how the environment is changing for both humans as well as animals like the polar bears that we're observing here. Personally, I'm the first time I've seen a polar bear in the wild outside of a zoo was on a ship, actually. I had the great pleasure in 2009 when I was a student to join a research cruise on a ship into towards the Arctic, close to Greenland, and we did see several polar bears really out on the ice, hunting, as well as just like hanging out far away from the coast, but always like close to the sea ice that they like so much. And it's really great to essentially see them here in Churchill on the tundra when they're on land, and you can really see them really hanging out and waiting for the sea ice to form, because that's really where they like to be. And I also want to shout out to Polar Bears International, and everybody who's helping to make this work, because it's always a lot of fun. The first time I had the honor to work with them was 2 years ago in 2016, around the same time of year. But interestingly, it was a very different kind of year. It was like extremely warm, and the sea ice took a long time to form. The bears were getting a little impatient, I presume, waiting for their precious sea ice. And this time around, actually, it looks a little better. It was pretty cold lately here, and we have already a layer of snow on the ground. So we're hopeful that this is going to be sort of a good year for the bears and a quick onset of the sea ice that they like. So I guess I'm also advertising the expertise we have on board on anything related to weather and climate that you might care about. So I'll pass it back to Alicia or BJ.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Yeah, thanks, Flavio.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's awesome. We're sure lucky to have such great guests that come on board here. It's just helps us, and we learn a lot, and they learn a lot, and we all get to watch some polar bears and get re-inspired all the time. So BJ, we had a question, which is a really good one, and with your kind of long context being up here, can you talk about, like, people are wondering about feeding the bears here and when those laws kind of went into effect that we can't feed bears, and kind of how does that work? Are people, throwing cookies to these bears here?
Yeah, so in my 10 plus years up here, I have never seen anybody feed any of the bears here. I really don't think it happens very often, if at all. There's a pretty strict set of rules here that all the buggies abide by. And as you've seen these vehicles drive by, there is a back deck where you could be outside, but we don't allow food on the back deck. We do eat lunch while we're out here, or meals on the buggy, but all the food stays inside the vehicle. You're not allowed to wave your cookies outside or anything like that. So everything's done inside. A long time ago, they did used to feed the bears here, and I think that's probably pretty true in many places around the world, not just here. I know that Yellowstone used to have an open dump, and people would go look at the bears, the black bears and grizzly bears there a long time ago. And I think it's just been kind of a slow process for humans to learn that that's not really a great idea to feed bears. Doesn't matter what type of bear you're working with. So I'm not exactly sure when they stopped feeding bears here, but I think it was sometime in the 90s. They stopped feeding them, and no bears get fed now, and we keep all the food up top out of reach. And it's been quite a while since any of them have been fed around here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, BJ. So a few more questions coming in, which is great. Someone's asking about kind of the population of polar bears worldwide, and is it increasing? That's a really good question that you do hear that sometimes. Overall, the global population is not increasing. What did happen is that back in like the 50s and 60s, after all these high-powered rifles and snowmobiles and aircraft were invented, people were able to hunt polar bears a lot more easily, and then that led to overhunting them because folks from all over the world were coming up to hunt polar bears and get, polar bear skin rugs sort of thing. So the countries that manage polar bears got together in the early 70s and kind of said, hey, let's do better at research and conservation, and let's manage the hunting a little more closely so that we can make sure we keep polar bears around. And so after these kind of rules around hunting and better research and that went into place, yes, the polar bear population did increase after that, which was good because it had gotten, too low from overhunting. So now what we're seeing is the population did kind of get back to where it should be. We are seeing certain groups of polar bears right now that have already been affected by loss of sea ice due to a warming climate. Overall, there's many different regions where polar bears live, and those regions are going to be